Lawyers, what's the most ridiculous argument you've heard in court? I'm a lawyer, so I've heard my fair share of ridiculous arguments, but one stands out in a way that makes me shake my head every time I think about it. This happened during a commercial trial a few years back. The case was dry on paper, contract dispute, nothing particularly flashy. But the courtroom itself was tense enough to make anyone feel like they were walking on a tightrope. Jury members were present, judge was patient but firm, and the opposing counsel, a guy named Michael Donovan, had a reputation for theatrics. We were in the middle of my direct examination, trying to admit a business record into evidence through one of their own witnesses. The witness, a mid-level manager named Denise Hart, had identified the document as one of their official company files. Typed, signed, dated, all standard. Pretty unremarkable stuff. I handed the document to the witness, asked her a couple of clarifying questions, and then proceeded to lay the foundation to get it before the jury. Out of nowhere, Michael objected. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and said, "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance and authenticity." I blinked. Authenticity. The witness literally just said it was a company document. The jury looked on, curious, some shifting in their seats like they could sense the drama. Judge Peterson, a seasoned jurist who had been on the bench for over 20 years, called us up to the sidebar. As we walked to the bench, I tried to wrap my head around what Michael was doing. "You're objecting to the authenticity of their own document?" I whispered under my breath. Judge Peterson raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Donovan, state your basis for authenticity objection." Michael shuffled his papers, muttering something about corporate procedures and chain of custody. I could feel my patience thinning, but I kept it professional. "Your Honor," I said, stepping closer. "This is their exhibit. Is counsel actually suggesting that they submitted inauthentic documents to this court?" There was a beat of silence. You could almost see Michael's jaw tighten. Judge Peterson turned fully to him, eyes narrowing slightly. "Mr. Donovan, are you submitting non-authentic documents?" Michael stammered. His voice shook a little. No, Your Honor, of course not." Judge Peterson's lips pressed into a thin line. "Very well. The document is admitted." We returned to the jury, and I handed the exhibit back to Denise Hart, who testified smoothly, clearly relieved that the document had made it in. The jury barely registered the sidebar exchange, but I caught a few smirks among the gallery. They knew they'd just witnessed an absurd little spectacle. I went back to my questions and got Denise to highlight key points from the document. Meanwhile, Michael sat silently, flipping through his notes like a man who had just been caught in his own trap. I later heard from a colleague that he had spent several minutes planning that objection in the morning, thinking it would throw me off. The fact that it required him to argue, in front of the judge, that his client had possibly submitted a fake document apparently didn't register in advance. After the trial, I told a friend about it over lunch. He laughed so hard he almost choked on his sandwich. "You're kidding. He actually tried to discredit his own evidence to keep it from the jury?" I nodded. Every time I think about it, it still amazes me. Lawyers are supposed to be logical, strategic, careful, and occasionally ruthless. But there's also a baseline of common sense. This argument had none. The document went in, the jury saw it, and the case ultimately settled in favor of my client. Michael Donovan was still practicing, of course, but that day remains one of those moments where I felt like the universe had delivered a little comedic justice in the middle of a courtroom. Even seasoned judges get those tiny moments where they blink, and you can see them thinking, did that just happen? This was one of those moments. Michael wanted to prevent me from showing a document that he literally submitted himself, and in doing so, he had to convince the court it might be fake. The jury never knew how close they came to watching a grown man argue his client's own honesty into question. I never expected to be impressed by a courtroom maneuver, but that was peak absurdity.